One day, Grandpa found a tiny kitten, shivering from the cold like a frozen leaf. As the kitten grew, its behavior became peculiar. Its piercing, bright yellow eyes followed every movement around it, and its unpredictable leaps defied all logic. When the truth finally came out, Grandpa was stunned. The little kitten was not at all what it seemed. One autumn evening stood out vividly in his mind. In the silence of the cozy living room, where only the flicker of a candle accompanied his thoughts, a strange sound echoed. Grandpa, startled, froze, clutching his mug of hot tea. He listened intently. After a few seconds, it came again, a soft, plaintive squeak that seemed to reverberate through the cool, crisp autumn night. Grandpa took a deep breath, felt his heart pound, and throwing a colorful scarf around his shoulders, stood up resolutely. Dusk was deepening outside, shrouding the yard in twilight. The night chill amplified the sounds, making every rustle seem louder. Grandpa could hear the wind whispering through the leaves and the branches of the trees creaking. His curiosity mingled with unease. He took a flashlight from the hook by the front door and carefully descended the steps. The flashlight beam sliced through the thick darkness, casting long shadows that danced on the walls and trees. Grandpa walked through his garden, listening for the repeating sound. It led him to an old oak tree standing at the far end of the yard. It was there that Grandpa's gaze fell upon a tiny ball of fluff, shivering from the cold and pressed against the roots of the mighty tree. The small creature was a kitten, its eyes wide with fear, looking straight at him. Grandpa's heart, as if ice, began to melt at the sight. Without hesitation, he picked up the kitten. Its damp fur was cold to the touch, and its small body trembled weakly. The kitten, feeling the warmth, snuggled closer as a fresh gust of wind swirled around them, reminding them of the late autumn chill. Without wasting a moment, Grandpa carried the little one inside, carefully wrapping it in a warm blanket. His thoughts were consumed by the foundling's health. Excitement, mixed with anxiety, spurred him to act quickly. In the kitchen, where warmth and comfort softened the sounds of the wind, Grandpa carefully washed the kitten with warm water, freeing it from dirt and cold. A soft squeak sounded again, breaking the silence. Wrapping the kitten in a fluffy blanket, Grandpa prepared a saucer of warm milk for it. The little creature drank greedily, as if it were its first meal in days. Gradually, the kitten's body relaxed, the trembling disappeared, and its gaze warmed. Grandpa felt a joy he hadn't felt in a long time. The kitten's presence filled his home with new meaning, brightening his everyday life. The question of how the tiny creature ended up in his garden still occupied Grandpa's thoughts. However, now, looking at the peacefully sleeping kitten, he was simply happy for the company. This little guest gave him a sense of warmth and care, filling his loneliness with new colors. Gradually, Martin's lost resolve began to return, as if a small flame was kindling inside. Soft morning sunlight gently filtered into the room, as if trying to dispel the remnants of the night's darkness. Nearby, in a cozy corner, Martin's new companion, a small kitten yet to be named, stirred. It had been sleeping peacefully, but now it opened its eyes, as if sensing that its owner was awake. Martin, barely awake, was still observing the tiny creature, thinking about it with warmth. Energetic and determined, Martin suddenly realized that it was time to get to know his new friend better. Taking the kitten in his arms, he went outside, where the new day greeted them with bright colors. The world beyond the doorstep seemed to come alive with them, filled with freshness and light. Walking along the path leading to the old oak tree, Martin recalled their first encounter. The place, hidden in the shadow of the mighty tree, now seemed completely different in the daylight. Just recently, the night darkness had concealed the details, but now everything was revealed in a new light. Approaching closer, he noticed trampled leaves and signs of struggle imprinted in the soft dirt on the ground. These signs reminded Martin what this little kitten had gone through, as he had found it at the foot of the tree, where it had fought for its life with all its strength. Back in the garden, Martin sat down on a bench and carefully held the kitten close, as if wanting to protect it from all harm. A deep sense of attachment and tenderness grew in his heart. Quietly, barely audibly, he whispered, looking into the kitten's eyes.
"Jure a real little explorer, aren't you?"
The kitten, as if understanding these words, responded with a soft, almost inaudible sound. In its gaze, one could see both fear and curiosity. It seemed to recognize the place, perhaps remembering its recent trials.
Martins resolve only grew stronger.
He understood that his task now was to protect this tiny creature from the dangers of the outside world. Returning home, Martin began to set up the yard to make it safe. Meanwhile, his new friend playfully and clumsily scampered around his feet, as if already declaring this place its home. Martin felt a sense of confidence growing within him. He knew that he would no longer leave the kitten alone and would not allow fate to put it in danger again. The troubling thoughts that had previously bothered him began to dissipate, giving way to joy and peace. This little kitten, which had appeared in his life so suddenly, became a symbol of a new chapter. As the door closed behind them, the corners of Martin's lips twitched into a faint smile. His orderly life would never be the same, and he, not holding back his joy, allowed himself to immerse himself in new experiences. Life, it seemed, sometimes presented difficult lessons, but Oliver, that's what Martin named his little pet, adapted to his new home surprisingly quickly. His first night in Martin's house passed in an atmosphere of curiosity and caution. He explored every corner, and Martin, lying in bed, listened to the barely audible sounds of small paws tapping on the wooden floor. A mixture of anxiety and tenderness intertwined in the owner's soul. Martin wondered if Oliver needed a thorough checkup at the vet's. Deciding not to delay, he dialed the number of local Dr. Brown and made an appointment. While waiting for the visit, Martin noticed that the kitten was behaving warily, as if sensing something unusual. In the vet's office, Oliver clung tightly to his owner, and his big eyes studied the surroundings. With a warm smile, Dr. Brown greeted them. "Who do we have here?" he said gently, extending his hand so that Oliver could sniff it. Martin watched the vet's actions with slight concern. The doctor noted that, despite all the difficulties, the kitten's condition had improved significantly. His young age and difficult trials required special attention and care. Leaving the clinic, Martin felt relieved. He carefully put food, vitamins, and a toy into Oliver's carrier. On the way home, he told the kitten about the garden, the plants, and the birds, as if introducing him to the new world of which he was now a part. Gradually, Oliver began to feel more confident, and his playful nature became more and more apparent. He enthusiastically chased the sunbeams in the living room. In the evening, comfortably settled in his armchair, Martin suddenly realized that he was laughing. This sound had been so rare in his life that he was involuntarily surprised by his own reaction. And Oliver, comfortably settled on his lap, was purring with pleasure. In that moment, Martin realized how much his everyday life had changed. Life, previously filled with loneliness, had now gained new meaning thanks to the appearance of the small creature. Evenings, which had previously passed in silence, were now full of sweet cares and tender affection. Looking at the sleeping Oliver, Martin felt his heart overflowing with responsibility and love. It was clear that the kitten had adapted wonderfully to his new home. Moreover, he had become an indispensable part of Martin's life, filling it with warmth and joy. As time passed, as the days slowly turned into weeks, Martin began to notice traits in Oliver that set him apart from other kittens he had ever dealt with. One morning, enjoying tea by the window, Martin noticed that Oliver was moving with amazing focus. In the twilight, his movements were not playful, as with ordinary kittens, but precise and deliberate. The cat's gaze, like the piercing gaze of an experienced observer, glided over details that most people simply do not notice. There was a feeling of hidden threat in the air. When a leaf fell from a branch outside the window, the kitten's reaction was lightning fast. He rushed to the glass, as if completely focused on what was happening outside. While Martin was doing ordinary chores around the house, Oliver was always nearby, carefully watching his every move. The kitten's ears picked up barely audible sounds that Martin himself didn't hear, and Oliver's head immediately turned to the slightest rustle. All this only increased the growing anxiety in the grandpa's soul. In such moments, Martin realized more and more clearly how strong the spirit of wildlife was in this small creature. The kitten could frolic with sticks and balls, but he did it not just playfully, but with amazing accuracy. At times it was both fascinating and frightening. One evening, Martin noticed that Oliver was moving in a strange rhythm, squats, lunges, movements resembling a predator ready to pounce. These habits made one wonder, was there something more behind them than just playfulness? With the onset of winter, the days became shorter and the nights colder, but Martin's house was filled with warm coziness. Nevertheless, this only emphasized the grandpa's anxiety. Oliver's behavior became increasingly strange, and each day added new mysteries. One day, when Martin was cleaning in the garden, he noticed how the kitten reacted to birds. Instead of the expected playful chase, Oliver sat motionless and watched them intently, exactly like an experienced hunter. The kitten's body was tense, as if he was about to jump, and his gaze betrayed his innate instincts. Even when the birds disappeared, Oliver continued to watch them, not changing his pose. There was a hidden power in it. Such scenes even more convinced Martin that Oliver was far from an ordinary pet. One evening, at home, deciding to give the kitten a new toy, Martin used a ball soaked in catnip. However, Oliver's reaction turned out to be strangely indifferent. He just sniffed the ball and calmly walked away. But a trivial piece of thread suddenly became an object of much greater interest to him. Martin realized more and more clearly that Oliver was fundamentally different from the cats he was used to. These differences were manifested not only in appearance, in round, bright yellow eyes, fluffy cheeks, and a small but strong body, but also in some special internal quality that was difficult not to notice. On that quiet evening by the fireplace, Martin seriously wondered for the first time, was Oliver really just a kitten? The silhouette of the little animal was clearly outlined against the fire. His ears sensitively picked up every crackle, and his body remained in tension all the time, as if he was ready for a lightning-fast reaction. "Oliver, who are you really?" Martin whispered with a faint smile, but also with deep inner turmoil. In response, The cat turned his head and looked at him with his all-seeing gaze, as if he really understood the meaning of the question. The next day, his suspicions only intensified. Neighbor Susan, who had stopped by to see Oliver, exclaimed with delight as soon as she saw him. "Martin, this isn't an ordinary cat. Have you seen his eyes?
And his habits?
He seems to know more about us than we do ourselves." Martin laughed, trying to brush it off as a joke, but Susan's words lingered in his soul for a long time. They planted seeds of doubt that grew with each passing moment. Finally, Martin contacted Dr. Brown and described all the strange things he had noticed in Oliver's behavior. The next morning, Martin took the kitten to the vet. Dr. Brown, friendly and attentive to detail, already knew about Oliver's unusual features, but visibly frowned during the personal examination.
Martin, his eyes.
"I've never seen anything like it. Over the years of practice, I've seen many cats, but Oliver is truly unique," said the doctor. His voice sounding both admiration and anxiety, which made Martin even more uneasy. "I think we need to do a series of tests," he continued after a short pause, "to rule out any rare cases and understand who he really is." "Of course, doctor, I agree," Martin replied, feeling a mixed feeling of hope and fear burn in his chest. Leaving the clinic, Martin felt his heart clench with excitement. He understood that it was not just about the cat's character traits. Oliver was a much more complex creature than an ordinary pet, and the results of the tests could turn his usual world upside down. After meeting with Dr. Brown, Martin's anxiety mixed with impatience. Every phone call sounded especially loud, as if announcing the onset of a turning point. And finally, the phone rang again, causing Martin to flinch. He picked up the receiver with a trembling hand and heard an excited voice.
"Mr. Thompson?"
"We've received the test results." The doctor's voice sounded with noticeable uncertainty, immediately transferring to Martin. "What did you find?" he asked, staring at Oliver, who was sitting on the windowsill and looking out the window with a focused look, as if he was waiting for something too. The doctor carefully continued. "Your Oliver's genetic markers are very different from ordinary felines. Moreover, they indicate." A chill ran down Martin's spine, confirming his worst or boldest guesses. The incredible discovery shocked Martin and turned out to be more significant than he could have imagined. In the conversation with the doctor, it turned out that Oliver may be directly related to rare wild species living in Central Asia, or to palace cats with complex genetics. The realization that a creature with a wild nature lived in his house filled Martin's soul with both awe and excitement. This entailed serious consequences, including from the point of view of law and ethics. Dr. Brown explained that such cats are rare, although there is information about them in the scientific community. Often people, especially without suspecting the true nature, mistake such kittens for ordinary domestic ones. "It is important to think about how this will affect Oliver's future," the doctor emphasized, because the preservation of wild species is not an easy task, often regulated by strict rules. Martin listened to the doctor's words with a heavy heart. And then, looking at Oliver, he suddenly saw in the outlines of his face what he had not noticed before. Features that previously seemed familiar took on new meaning. The cat, as if feeling his owner's confusion, flexibly jumped off the windowsill, gently approached and rubbed against Martin's legs, trying to calm him down. While Martin's hands stroked the fluffy silver fur, a real whirlwind of thoughts and emotions reigned in his head. He clearly understood that Oliver was not just a domestic cat. This wild creature skillfully concealed his nature, it seemed, with some special graceful caution. But the connection between them was too deep to think only about his own peace of mind. Martin realized his responsibility to those in whom the wild nature was becoming more and more apparent. He understood that he had to make a difficult decision. "He needs the best," Martin finally said, feeling his voice begin to tremble. "I can't be selfish. He deserves a life that matches his nature, not just my affection." And the day came when he had to say goodbye to Oliver. Holding him in his arms, Martin felt the warmth of his little body, the softness of his fur, and heard the rhythmic purring that brought him comfort. It had been several months since he made the decision to transfer Oliver to the Wildlife Conservation Center. The separation was an important step, because the grandpa consciously chose freedom for his pet. "Goodbye, my dear Oliver," Martin whispered quietly, putting the kitten in the carrier. Oliver raised his deep, yellow eyes to him, as if understanding that their paths were diverging. As the car drove him away into the distance, Martin stood motionless, and tears streamed down his cheeks. His heart clenched with pain, but there was also a quiet relief in it. Oliver would live as his nature intended. Free and real. Martin felt like a link between the kitten's past and his future. The separation was agonizing, but it also brought some peace. The understanding that Oliver would flourish and find real life in his natural environment became the best consolation. As the sun set below the horizon, Martin turned and slowly walked back. He felt deep gratitude for the lessons that this unusual cat had given him. Oliver taught him to cherish nature, to see its power, and to accept the world in its vast diversity. Despite the separation, in Martin's soul, Oliver forever remained an integral part of his life, leaving behind bright memories and important discoveries.